Hi, I'm Rob Spinner. It's a pleasure for me today to introduce Dr. Fred Meyer. Over the many years I've known Fred, I don't recall ever having the opportunity or the privilege to introduce him. So suffice it to say, I'm going to try to be relatively brief. Otherwise, I'd use up the half hour for it. Fred wears many hats, holds many important and distinguished current titles at Mayo, the Uline Professor of Neurosurgery, Enterprise Chair of Neurosurgery, Executive Dean for Education, and Dean of the Alex School of Medicine, not to mention his role as Executive Director of the American Board of Neurological Surgery. For sure, a quadruple threat. For more than 35 years, he's been one of the busiest, best, and most versatile of the neurosurgeons here at Mayo. He's been inducted into the Teacher of the Year Hall of Fame and received the Distinguished Educator Award at Mayo. He's been PI on several basic science NIH grants. He served in my role as department chair at Mayo Rochester for more than 10 years. He's been a past president of the American Academy, Neurologic Surgery, and editor of JNS. He's published hundreds of papers, presented numerous named lectures, and received honors at multiple venues and from various societies. Despite all of these professional accomplishments, he is the consummate family man. We first met in 1987, though he doesn't remember it. I was a medical student and he was in the lab finishing his neurosurgical residency training at Mayo. And ever since, he's been a mentor, friend, and role model for me and countless others. It's an honor for me, Fred, to chat with you today. I'll just ask a few basic questions. So for my benefit, and I don't know the answer, when and why did you become a doctor?
Well, first, Rob, to the WNS, thank you for the invitation and opportunity. And Rob, thank you for all those kind words. I mean, they're really not deserved. You make me sound a lot smarter than I am, to be honest with you. And I mean that in sincerity. Why did I become a neurosurgeon, or why did I become a doctor?
Yeah, both.
Both, okay.
Which order?
Well, my dad was a physician, and I think that probably came from that, the inspiration to, I saw how hard he worked to try to help people. It was very inspiring, and it just seemed like the obvious and natural thing for me to pursue. Why I became a neurosurgeon is a different story. When I was at Boston University School of Medicine, so that's one of the other medical schools in Boston, on my third year rotations, I was assigned to support, or shadow rather, the neurosurgery department at Boston University, which actually consisted of one neurosurgeon, just one. And his name was Dr. Edward Spatz. And Dr. Spatz was an amazing individual. He was an amazing physician. He was absolutely inspirational. And it's because of him that I went into neurosurgery. Testimony to the power of mentorship. I suppose if he had been a family doc, that's what I would have done. He was just inspiring. More on the professionalism, his empathy for patients. In the OR, he was technical master, but I was too naive to really appreciate that. It was the way he approached patients. So that's why I went to neurosurgery, Rob.
And what brought you to Mayo?
I was a mercy match. I was like one of the most untalented medical student applicants in the neurosurgery match. And I don't say that in false humility. I'm just saying it's the truth. I remember my first interview was at Yale with Dr. Collins. He interviewed three of us at once, and I was in the middle, and there's a gentleman on the right and a gentleman on the left, and they had a briefcase, and they popped them open and had a bunch of papers. And Dr. Collins looked at me, and I really had one really minor paper, and I could see in his eyes, it was sort of like a, you're really pathetic applicant, aren't you, type of thing. And that's the truth. The second interview was at Mayo in Rochester. I flew here and stayed in a boarding house, believe it or not. And the next day I had a bunch of interviews. But the truth of the matter is I spent probably an hour and a half with Dr. Ross Miller. Dr. Miller was the chair of neurosurgery at Mayo Clinic. Still today, he probably did more brain tumors than anybody else in the world. He was a master surgeon. And he was fascinated by the fact that I spent well over a decade working in a fish market growing up. And we talked about that at length, fish market and work and hard work. I also worked on some fishing boats, and we talked about that. About 2 weeks later, I got a phone call from Dr. Sant, who was the program director. And I was back home, and I remember like yesterday, he said, is this Fred Meyer? I said, yes. He said, this is Dr. Sant. And of course, I thought it wasn't, but it was. And he said, we've decided to offer you a position, quote unquote, because you worked in a fish market. We therefore know you know how to work hard. And that's why we're offering you a position. Do you want it or not? And that's the truth. I was offered a position because they perceived me as being a hard worker. And then for the first year, over the first year or longer, I was on call at St. Mary's Hospital every other night. So it was brutal, but it's because of hard work, and it's because of the fish market, honestly, that I matched at Mayo Clinic in neurosurgery. And that's the truth, because I had no talent as a medical student.
So tell us about the hard work, since you brought it up.
Yeah.
Do you think that's the key to success and your success?
I think for me, it's totally the key to success. I will tell you, and I'm being very sincere. I don't consider myself to be a very smart or brilliant person. I'm married to, my wife is brilliant. Brilliant. I am not. I happen to be good with my hands, but I also happen to be a very hard worker. And if I've had any success in neurosurgery, it's purely due to hard work. And that's it, straight up. It's not because of talent. I'm being sincere, hard work.
As what I introduced you as one of the most versatile surgeons, I would also have to say that you have the knack of not only being an incredible multitasker, which is separate, but I think as far as inherent technical skills, it's always impressed me how, even to this day, my memories of you're chomping off some facets and making spine surgery look so easy, even though that wasn't your forte, so to speak. And I also remember when you picked up the pediatric neurosurgery practice out of nowhere at Mayo and sort of made that look easy and did all that call. So there is something not only to the hard work, but to what you're saying about sort of your use of your hands. I wanted to just talk about your relationship with Dr. Sant, because I know that was special for you. And I've never talked to you about this either, but just how that's affected your life and different aspects of being a
Sure.
teacher and a parent.
Well, when I came to Mayo, I was fortunate to train in a true golden age of neurosurgery at Mayo Clinic. Because think about it, you had Dr. Miller, master surgeon, who many haven't heard of, but he was a master technician. Dr. Thora Sant, a master technician, might I add, one of the most humblest neurosurgeons. Amazing operations, vein bypasses to the posterior circulation, et cetera, but he was humble. There's a lesson to be learned there. Dr. Edward Laws, master transsphenoidal and skull-based surgeon. Dr. Bert Onofrio, spine surgery. Dr. Ebersol, Dr. Rick March, my colleague now in epilepsy. So I was very fortunate to work in a golden age of great neurosurgeons. It's true, I spent a lot of time with Dr. Sant. I worked in his lab for over a year and a half, and I spent a lot of time on his service. I can tell many, many stories. The beauty about Dr. Sant, in my opinion, was he was humble, a great technician. He really cared about patients. I mean, he was there all the time in the hospital, incredibly hardworking, but he was humble. And that always is a message that has been important to me. Training under Dr. Sant was a remarkable experience, as it was with all the other neurosurgeons. But with Dr. Sant, it was special. He demanded excellence in the operating room. I remember the first time we did a lot of carotid endarterectomies, and I remember the first time starting to sew in a vein patch, and every other stitch was wrong, and he made me take it out and he made me do it again, to the point where I didn't want to be told you're going to do the surgery, because it was almost embarrassing in front of a master surgeon like him. At the same time, for many of us who were here during the time when he became, very sick, it was very emotionally draining. It made us very sad. It was depressing to watch him suffer. It was inspirational and depressing. He wore a back brace so he could operate, but yet he was in terrible pain. And seeing an icon suffer in that way to the very end, but adhere to the principles of patient care and excellence in patient care, was absolutely inspirational. So that's what I remember about him.
What's
to
your
this day.
What's your favorite recollection of being under his tutelage? Is there a story that comes to mind?
There's one story that comes to mind. Well, there's many, many stories, but since this is a free-flowing conversation, you prompted. I remember waiting Sunday morning at St. Mary's to make rounds with him. You made rounds, and for those of our older generation, making rounds was rounding on 30 patients, right? I mean, it's very different today. So you started very early. You had to do the obligatory spinal taps, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember waiting in the lounge there for him to come, because we were supposed to meet at 8, which meant I started rounding at about 4:30 in the morning on Sunday, and this is the truth. And he wasn't there at 8, and I dutifully sat there. And he eventually came in around 10:30 in the morning, and I just waited. He came in and took off his coat. He had, bad cancer and was obviously in pain. And he said, "You shouldn't have waited. You got to go out and smell the roses, because at some point you won't be able to smell the roses." So I remember that, very meaningful to me. And there again is a lesson, right? I mean, it's easy to let neurosurgery consume you to your death. I think it's important to remember your family, your friends, particularly your family, and devote time to them. Devote time to yourself. But I remember that you ought to go out and smell the roses, Fred. You shouldn't be waiting for me. Yeah.
That's a great story. So let's transition. Let's keep going chronologically. So, then you were outstanding. You worked with Dr. Sunt. You had this talent. You were a fishmonger person, and they asked you to join staff. What was your role at that point, and what was your aspiration?
Well, so interesting story. So I'd always wanted to be in academics. And I went and interviewed at 4 different places at the time, across the country. And I went back to one place which was closer to home along the East Coast 3 times. And I had decided that's where I wanted to go. And I was about to, call, and I got this call, "Can you come to Dr. Sunt's office?" I did. And Dr. Sunt said, "I've decided you're going to stay here at Mayo Clinic." Well, if God's talking to you and says you're going to do this, that's what you do. And so that's why I stayed at Mayo. I had no intent to stay at Mayo. I didn't think I was good enough to stay at Mayo. When I started at Mayo as a junior faculty, my perspective was just whatever came across the board, you do. So that meant staying to the end of clinic and beyond, making yourself available 24/7 to try to help out. You remember at Mayo Clinic, we are a different model. We're unincentivized. We're all the same. If I do 1 case or 500 cases, I, like all my colleagues, are paid the same. It was a team spirit. And so I felt like my role as the junior person was to just be available all the time to help out. And that was my approach. I always felt that I was more destined towards the cranial side of the practice and the vascular side of the practice. And that's what it seems like I was hired for, and that's what I pursued. So in the beginning of my practice, I did a lot of carotids, aneurysms, tried to do bypasses, although clearly, me compared to a Dr. Sunt or Dr. Peepgrass, let's not forget Dr. Peepgrass was here at the time, master surgeon. I was sort of like third in line. We also had Dr. Marsh. So I was sort of fourth in line in terms of vascular cases. But, you do what you do. And I was lucky because, I trained with Dr. Sunt, with Dr. Peagrass, with Dr. Marsh, superb vascular technicians, superb surgeons and physicians. And so I sort of picked up what was available, to answer your question.
Well, in your career crescendoed and you developed several niches, but centered around intracranial work, and eventually became chair here and did that admirably for 10 years. As chair, you also were program director. What are the things that you're most proud of during those 10, 11 years?
Yeah. So my focus was always, when you build as a chair, you build a strategic plan, right? And my strategic plan was to try to make our training program the best in the country. And that was, I felt, the purpose of being chair, straight up, which of course means that you had to recruit physicians and subspecialty experts to fulfill not just the clinical practice, but the well-rounded training of a resident. So, I suppose I was fortunate to recruit some fantastic colleagues, Dr. Lanzino in endovascular, Dr. Parney, Dr. Fogelson, Dr. Clark, Dr. Van Gumpel. These are all wonderful surgeons, half of whom trained here, half who didn't and trained elsewhere. But my goal was to try to make our residency the best in the country. And hopefully we tried to do that in some way. So that's what I think about as an accomplishment more than anything else. And then I also wanted to instill a certain amount of research and academics. So we tried to build some basic science research programs, because when I inherited the department, we didn't have much basic science research. So I tried to build that. And I also, I inherited the chair from Dr. Peepgrass, who was a superb chair, who inherited from Dr. Sunt, right? And so I had to, do my best to try to continue their great work in all three shields: clinical, research, and education.
So I want to transition a little bit away from neurosurgery, but when you think about neurosurgery even now, I would ask, what are you most proud of in neurosurgery that you've helped develop, and whether it's professionalism, academics, resident training, techniques, which aspects are you most proud of? And
there's a lot of things I'm very proud of. Whether I had a great impact or not is still open to debate, right? Did I create any new surgeries? No. I did a lot of operations, or continue to do a lot of operations, but is there an operation I pioneered? No. Is there a new technology I pioneered? No. Hopefully, I enhanced training and education in our department. I guess when I think about what I'm most proud of, it's my contributions to education, both at Mayo Clinic and at our medical school, our residency, and also, honestly, at the American Board of Neurological Surgery, because we've transformed that. Not me per se, me with the directors, several generations of directors have really transformed the Board of Neurological Surgery into a meaningful and powerful and important organization. And I'm very proud to have been part of that, to be frank with you.
well,
So to your question, I would say Dean, Education, and the board.
So you've transitioned beautifully into the board, because I was telling you and thanking you for your assistance in making sort of the MOC process so streamlined. And I say that respectfully and thankfully, because orthopedics isn't as easy for me. With the board, what an amazing legacy there. What are you proudest of with the board now? You've been doing it for a long time. So
let's, when you talk about MOC, by the way, we have to give great credit to Dr. Sandra Conley, who's at Columbia, and Dr. Richard Ellenbogen at University of Washington, because they were the masterminds and geniuses behind transforming MOC. Remember, the ABNS, being a member board of the ABMS, had this obligation to have maintenance of certification. It was our decision to make it user-friendly, to make it as least painful to neurosurgeons, to make it meaningful to neurosurgeons. So for example, we led the charge to make sure that if you did MOC, you were accredited by the American College of Surgeons to cover level 1 trauma. That was a wonderful opportunity and positive for neurosurgery. So, I mean, I think we've done many, many positive things on the board, and I don't deserve credit for any of those things. I worked with an incredible group. MOC, ABNS Post, for example, right? And collecting cases, the new way to evaluate. I think over time on the board, we saw, truthfully, a fair amount of unnecessary surgery, it seemed, in our field, right? And I think the directors collectively felt that somehow we need to mold practice. We need to try to eliminate unnecessary surgeries if at all possible. So we developed the Post to look at films to try to be fair to candidates. We also completely modified the examination where now you're tested on your own case as opposed to mock cases, right? And so we tried to make it positive and meaningful.
So that's the board. So let's shift hats. So let's now talk about the dean role. Obviously, that's one of the other jobs you have when you're not working for me hard enough. Talk to the group, because I think you're really inspirational in several things. Number one is obviously what you're doing for the medical school. But I was talking to someone who's here today about how more Mayo medical students now are interested in neurosurgery. And I think that's multifactorial, but it's largely due to you directly and indirectly. How did you get there, and kind of what is your vision for Mayo Medical School, the Alex School of Medicine?
Yeah, well, again, you're very kind, Rob. I mean, leading education at Mayo Clinic has clearly been most meaningful to me and the highest honor professionally that I could ever hope to have achieved. I mean, our College of Medicine and Science, we have the largest GME system in the country, right? 275 programs. We have a medical school with 3 campuses. We have an allied health school with 175 programs, a large graduate school. And leading that collectively with great support and great colleagues has been amazing for me. In terms of, we've had a lot of efforts in education at Mayo Clinic. I can talk a lot about immersive technologies and augmented reality to train. I could talk about rotations across Mayo to learn from the best of our clinicians and scientists. And I'm talking about all learners, not just medical students, not just residents, but all across. But I suppose perhaps the thing I'm most proud of would be our efforts in diversity. I mean, I started this about 4.5, 5 years ago. So for example, we have 350 underrepresented in medicine students at our campuses right now this summer, learning from all sorts of clinicians and scientists. We have 25 pathway programs. We have academic alliances now with some historically Black colleges and medical schools. So if I had to say, what am I most proud of? It's that, to be honest with you. I mean, yeah, we had 5 students from our medical school match in neurosurgery. That's great. I'm excited about that. But honestly, I'm more proud of our diversity efforts. I mean, I think it's meaningful for our society. It's important. It's really important.
Do you think the skills as a neurosurgeon have helped you in your current role?
Oh, that's a tough question, Rob. I would suggest that as surgeons, we're not well suited to be deans. And let me explain. I always say, as a surgeon, like you see a tumor, cut it out. See an aneurysm, clip it. You're direct. You're very interdictive. In the dean role, you have to be more patient. You have to listen and learn, and you have to build support. And one's temperament as a surgeon sometimes is contrary to the skill sets that you need to be a successful dean. So honestly, I've had to learn those. I mean, I have to remind myself in certain meetings to try to be the very last person to speak instead of the first, right? You have to learn how to like coffee because you're sitting in a lot of meetings. You have to listen and be patient. Also, you have to develop accounting skills. I have a lot of great support, but when it comes to education, education costs money. And most academic medical centers, that's the tension. How do you get money to support education? How do you support clinicians who, on one hand, you want them operating or seeing patients to generate revenue, but on the other hand, they should be educating and teaching. Well, that costs. And so how do you balance the costs and the goals of the institution from a financial perspective? So, you need a basic sense of accounting. And of course, you have to, be willing to work with benefactors or potential benefactors and really present the institution in the best light. So there's skill sets there that you learn, that I've learned, quite frankly. Whether I'm doing a good job or not might be open to question, but those are the skill sets. So I had to learn, quite frankly, Rob. It was different. It was a different set. But I like it, quite frankly. I'll be saddened when I have to depart from this role. That's true.
Well, I think you'll be saddened without operating too. So what do you see as your future off the record here? So you've been dean now for 6 years. Do you see yourself operating in your 70s? Dean is your 70s?
Well, I mean, the difficulty with Mayo Clinic is we have, as you know, term limits, rotations. So if I wanted to be dean for 15 years, which I would love to do, that's not going to be an opportunity here for me at Mayo. We have fixed term limits and I'll have to move on. I'm not sure. I'm really not sure what I'm going to do. And it's an active discussion. I would be remiss without mentioning, and it's important, the importance of one's family, right? I still ask each day, honestly, whether have I been a really great parent or not. I have 6 kids. And I think, as most of us know, our kids grow up under huge burden. Their father, their mother's a neurosurgeon, and they have huge shoes to fill. Even if we don't mean to, we put a huge psychological burden on our kids. And sometimes I wonder if I tried my best, but did I really do as well as I could have? And the same would be for being a good husband. And so those are things I ask myself, and I try to integrate that into what am I going to do next? Is there any way I could be a better husband? Is there any way I could be a better father? And I'm being very sincere about it. I mean, you've hired a bunch of very fine younger neurosurgeons, and eventually I'm going to be obsolete, right? I mean, look at vascular. I mean, it used to be when some time ago, every aneurysm was clipped. Now, at least, the vast majority are treated better, with better outcomes endovascularly. So that whole science has changed. And being involved with other things like the board and being the dean, et cetera, I didn't really have the time to learn new technologies. I mean, transformative technologies like functional DBS, like stereotactic depth electrodes, like endovascular. And so eventually I'm going to be a little obsolete. And that's the truth of the matter. So to your question, Rob, I don't know what I'm going to do. For all I know, you're going to say to me, hey, it's time for you to leave. You're not earning your weight. It's time to say adios. I don't know. Ultimately, it'll be up to you, Rob, I suppose.
Fred, again, the day I interviewed, you don't remember this, but you were taking out an ulnar nerve tumor, and you asked me if I wanted to help you. So maybe I'll need a partner and hire you to do some peripheral nerve. You never know.
Fair enough.
That would be the best thing for peripheral nerve's future. Do you still see yourself retiring, though, from surgery? Not the dean, not teaching, but day in, day out surgery. Is that something you want to do in 10 years?
I know it will happen, right? I mean, let's be honest. As we get older, are we as good with our hands as we should be? Right? I mean, because ultimately we have the responsibility of doing the best for our patients, providing the best surgical care. And if I feel like I'm not doing that, or someone, pulls me aside and says, hey, you're not, Fred, things have changed a little, then I don't have the ego to keep operating if I'm not doing the best that I can do to help someone. None of us should, but I certainly wouldn't. So I guess, Rob, to your question, I'm not sure. I mean, I really don't know the answer, but it is something I debate all the time. Um, Honestly, if I would, well, I tell you what I would love to do. I would love to be the president of a small liberal arts college. I think it'd be so much fun to shape education at the fundamental level. That's something I would do. And that's something I might give up surgery for. Um, I will tell you that I have on the drawing board, and I've been meeting with some people for back on Cape Cod to build a camp for sick kids, a cancer camp. And so that's on my agenda, quite frankly, to do. So I don't know. I can't. I don't know how to answer your question. I'd
Well,
ask you, do you ever see yourself stop operating?
yeah, I do. And it's one of the things we're talking about at home every day. I think you have to plan your retirement. And I'm going to get really good at crossword puzzles and things that are non-medical, just because I like learning. But I think you have to be proactive in planning retirement, just like you plan your academic future.
Yeah.
I just wanted to transition about the balance thing, because I think it's important for everyone to hear about swim meets and how many you've been to and what you do at swim meets and how you sort of fit the family around work. But on the other hand, how you work around your family, because
Yeah.
you've always done that so well.
Oh, I don't know if my kids would agree with you, but thank you for saying so. I have 6 kids, and they grew up all swimming. Why? Because I had decided that I was going to retire on a sailboat, sail around, and everybody needed to know how to swim, and that's why they're all going to learn to swim. Well, retiring on a sailboat hasn't happened yet, but because of all that, we would go to swim meets, and the other advantage of swim meet is you one car, or this case a large van, 6 kids are swimming. You know what I mean? It was easy. All the kids are there. So I probably spent thousands of hours literally at every small Midwest middle school pool, chlorinated, sitting next to people who thought they had the next, Michael Phelps, screaming away. So I did a lot of that. I know every coffee shop in every small town in Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin. I mean, most of my kids swam collegiate, and so I would go and watch them, and that was pretty fun and cool. But to your point, I would, I would bring a suitcase. I was on the editorial board of JNS through much of that. I would, and we received these bundles of manuscripts that you had to read, and I would pack them up in a suitcase. So I'd go to swim meet with 2 suitcases of JNS manuscripts. In between, if for those who've been to swim meets, it's the whole weekend for like 2 minutes of time in the water. So I spent a lot of time sitting in the corridors of these middle schools doing JNS reviews. That's how I tried to balance things, or writing manuscripts, just like you, right? Like we all do. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
I don't know if I balanced. I don't know if I balanced so well. I'll tell you what I do appreciate, and what I do look forward to is fly fishing. And I there's nothing more beautiful for me than to be wet wading a river in Alberta or British Columbia with no one around other than my ugly brother, fly fishing. And I love it. It's the closest I feel like I get to God. Because remember, as neurosurgeons, we are always dealing with death and dying, right? It's always death and dying most of the time. Where I go fishing, I'm always catch and release. And so it's the one time in my life, outside work. Well, there's other times, but there's no death and dying. And maybe that's why I like it so much. It's how you get close to God, at least for me.
You're privileged. You have a daughter going into neurosurgery. Tell me about whether or not you recommended medicine and or neurosurgery to your kids. You have talented, bright kids.
Oh, you're very kind. We at all did not suggest or pressure medicine. So I have a son who's an ophthalmology resident. I have a daughter who's a neurosurgery resident. I have a son who's just starting off in investment, hedge fund. I have a son who's a computer scientist, a daughter who's in law school, and another daughter who's still in college, a global studies major. So we never at all suggested medicine. Remember, my wife is one of the youngest full professors of neurology at Mayo Clinic. And as I said, she's, brilliant, but we never pushed medicine. I actually tried to steer my daughter away from neurosurgery because neurosurgery is hard. And I honestly wanted her to have what I considered a normal life, to be outside of work and to enjoy life and to do the physical activities and other sorts of things. And neurosurgery doesn't truly allow that, I don't think. Depending on what type of neurosurgery you do, you're always on call. You're always in the hospital or in the OR and working. There's a lot of stress. So I actually tried to talk out of neurosurgery. Predictably, she didn't listen to me.
Anything else you'd like to talk about that sort of brings the essence of who you are and your legacy that we haven't touched on in some shape or form?
You're very kind, Rob. I would say, if anything, I would like to be remembered as a technically really fine neurosurgeon, an extremely productive neurosurgeon, but more importantly, professionally, hopefully had an important effect in some way on education, on medical education, on biomedical education for students, for the board. That's really important to me. But I think what the most important thing is that if my kids ever see this someday, I want them to know I tried to be a good parent. Wasn't easy, but I tried my best. And I would suggest to all of you that in the end, the only thing that really matters after your patients, that's not your career. It's not being president of this or writing a zillion papers. It's your patients, but beyond that, it's your family. And that's what really matters. And that's what I would say.
I think, Fred, I dated both of us back to residency and medical school respectively. And I just was thinking of a few quick anecdotes that sort of highlight your commitment to the trade and passing the trade as not only a mentor, but a sponsor. I owe so much to you because you've been there for me for several decades. But I remember as a resident, not knowing an answer on a Saturday conference that we don't have anymore. And I was asked the anatomy of the corpus callosum on a Saturday when I had a visitor in town and I felt really bad. And you as staff called me and apologized for the individual who was giving me a hard time in front of my colleagues and humiliating me. And that meant the world to me. And it really should mean the world to everyone who's watching this, because that went a long way, Fred. And I never thanked you for that. I remember going out to dinner with you when I was doing the Infolded Time with Dave Klein, and you were very kind to me at a nice restaurant. And, the opportunity to sort of interact with a staff when I was still a resident, when I was being considered to do peripheral nerve at Mayo, was very meaningful. I remember serving as research vice chair for you, and I remember the meetings we would have when we were a small department in the hallway here, halfway between your office and mine, and you'd ask me something and I'd go along with your idea, and you had a vision, and I loved being able to carry out a vision for you. And it showed me how to make quick decisions and how to sort of look beyond today. I thank you for that. I think what you've done with my alma mater, Mayo Medical School, is extraordinary. I've never been prouder to be an alumnus here. And I've never been prouder to be a head of a department of neurosurgery. So professionally, I can't thank you enough. Personally, I don't know how you do it. I mean,
Oh, wait.
Yeah.
Let me just say to those who, so I think when I stepped down as chair of the Department of Neurosurgery, it was a very fine department. And I think you've done a tremendous job bringing it to new and higher heights. So I congratulate you on that. I mean, I think what you've accomplished as chair is spectacular. Truly, truly.
Well, thanks. Personally, though, I don't know how you do it. I mean, I have two kids, spouse who is in medicine and I'm proud of, who's much more talented than I am, similar to your spouse. I don't know how I get through some of my days with two kids. Neither of my two kids wants to be in medicine because they think I work too hard. How you've balanced it over the years is extraordinary. And your JNS days, I remember you're working in conference, leading an M&M, leading whatever, a vascular conference, while grading manuscripts and stuff. And when you were talking about the water, those were in the days when you would print them out, they weren't online. And so I wondered whether or not some of the manuscript had water on them from the swim meets. But you really balanced a lot of things. And that's been one of the things I've had to work on. But I've looked at you as a multitasker for inspiration. And I think the audience needs to know you really do a lot of things incredibly well. And it's not just work-life balance, it's work-life integration. And you've done that extraordinarily. So quite a legacy. And as a chair, not only in Rochester, but across the enterprise, all of Mayo has benefited, and I think the world has benefited. So quite an accomplishment for somebody who just was a little fisher person years ago on the Cape. When are you going to the Cape, and do you still do the fishing out there?
First, thank you for your, thank you for your really kind words that I don't think I really deserved. Yeah, I'd like to go to Martha's Vineyard, visit my mom and family. We still fly fish out there, and hopefully someday that's where you'll find me.
Can you afford it though?
No.
All right.
You gotta wait. You gotta pay me more money.
I know. I'm waiting to give everyone a raise. Well, Fred, it's really been an honor for 37 years or whatever I said it was. Truly an honor, and really nice to be able to chat with you today without the fireside. And I hope you have a great weekend.
Thank you very much, Rob. I'm honored that you'd spend time talking to me. So thank you.